code editor. Not a problem. Okay. Right, so what we are going to talk about and focus on today is getting smart with template parts. Okay, so I'm going to show you a website, just real brief to kind of explain the principle of it. And then we're going to look at a little bit of code that actually gets into the nitty-gritty of it. So the challenge when designing websites is that you end up with a lot of repeated user interface components. So they could be spread across archives, little featured posty bits, just all over the place. You have a repetition of design or slight adaptations of that very same design. Now, when you get into kind of complex bespoke theme building, you can end up with a can of spaghetti, frankly. So repeated code all over the place, things lose their consistency and ultimately become very hard to manage, edit, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's bring up this website. So I built this website on behalf of a lovely agency called Elemental Edge, and I'm sure Gabriel wouldn't mind us talking about it because he's a nice guy, and ultimately I did not do any design on this at all. Okay, I built this from scratch, and it is a simplistic site for me, in all honesty. But the little secret and nugget of this one is it auto publishes about 300-400 posts a day. That's a day. And it's got about 300, it's got over 300,000 posts in it. Okay, the media library was blooming 200 gig or something, which is up on Amazon S3. And it is actually quite a clever little site. It's deceptively simple. It looks like an old school blog, but under the hood, it's an auto-publishing machine. Okay, so when we talk about like repeated interface components, let's look at this top area. Can you see my mouse on the screen as well, my mouse pointer? Yeah, okay, that helps. So if we take a look at this row of 4 cards below the carousel. So we look at this interface, we've got like a little ribbon CSS component, which is just showing taxonomy term or multiple terms. Then we've got like a title going on. Okay, so a little card, I like to call these components. Then if we scroll down a bit, well, actually, that's the same. It's just wide. Yeah, this one here, this top wide block, that's the same. It's just wide. Below it, we've got them repeated, displayed slightly differently, and onwards. Okay, so this is what I'm referring to, where we have these kind of common interface elements. Now, that's sitting in a completely different file. Okay, so that's a completely separate template part to this. Yet, with this little trick that we're going to see, we will end up reusing the same fragment or card, as we might call it, in what could be templates across the site. Okay, and another idea around this is using them for archives. And that's what we're going to look at code-wise when we get into it. Okay, so what I would say is big caveat around this. This is not for block editor and the kind of content areas really. This is for like, so it could be a custom page template. It could be like little includes you have in the footer. It could be these little cards on the side, which again are used 2, 3, 4 different times throughout the site, but with different data flowing into a single file. And that's what we'll kind of look at. That's the principle. So I'm not going to go deep explaining what a template part is. It's a function, it's a single file, it's a fragment. Okay, it's a fragment that we can reuse. And there's a function called getTemplatePart, and the interesting part is that's been extended. And we'll look at that in a touch more detail. So I think we'll probably get into code now. So I'm going to have to stop sharing that and share my code editor. Yeah, that one, share. Okay, so hopefully you can see my code editor now. I'll make the text a bit bigger so you can see what's going on. Okay, so let's get down to the crux of it. what we're looking at here is just the bog standard, most default file you can get apart from index.php and a WordPress theme, archive.php. Okay, and this file basically displays lists of posts, and you can use other template files and stuff, but I just thought it's the most simplest one for people to think about, which is the archive.php file. And let's not worry about what's going on up here particularly, but that's just display stuff. But here is the bit that anyone who's ever delved into WordPress coding knows. It's the start of the WordPress loop, as it's called, where we get the data and then it's bust down into individual posts, and then we display each individual post as we go through. So it kind of loops through. So don't worry about this extra div right here. That was because this has infinite loading on it, and the first set of posts I wanted to wrap in a div, and then the additional ones that loaded after, I wanted them identified in a different way for CSS targeting. So we go if have post, the usual WordPress loop. Well, have post, great. The post, okay, that's kind of normal, but then it changes. So instead of going straight into display code for your archive card, what we actually do is build up an array of values that will feed into our template part. Okay, so I'm setting up some variables here. So straight off, I'm just getting the post ID. So we're kind of inside the loop. So we can, all of this stuff is nice and available to us. This one's quite interesting, which is getting the post class, because we add extra classes onto it, which is kind of nice. So that's kind of a useful little WordPress function in itself. These are the extra classes we're going to put onto it. Then we start getting into a couple of utility functions that are in my theme framework. So here we're turning an array to a delimited string to build up our CSS classes, to build those out. Get the title, we know that kind of stuff, the URL, we're getting the featured image. So I'm using a utility function out of my framework, which is freely available. You can tear it apart or get these functions straight out of it, which is a really nice kind of get image function for various different, and like with a fallback image and stuff like that. So we're building up our post _ d data array to feed into our template pile, and onwards we go. It's all fairly self-explanatory. The idea is we build up the output array and feed it into the template part, and that is the key principle here. And then here we go. Oh, little bit of debug code there. That's a good debugger function actually in my framework. And then standard WordPress code of get template part. In the first bit, we're getting the kind of path. So actually the file will be card-archive-general. And here's the new magic. This was not available to us until I think about 1 or 2 versions ago in WordPress, which is allowing us to pass all of this data we've built up straight into the template part. And that's the secret sauce right there. So now let's look at the actual card itself, the file that we get from template part. Here we go. So what I just check here is if it's set and available, the arguments that we've passed through, and is it array? So just really, really basic check. And then I check for required items. Okay, so if this stuff doesn't exist, nothing's going to display. It's not going to break. It's not going to display the wrong stuff, that kind of stuff. Then we're tacking in the name of the file, which I think is always useful as a CSS class. That's a good idea anyway when you're building stuff out. The actual name of the file, card archive general, will be a CSS class on the fragment. So I know exactly what I'm editing when I look at it. Okay, and yeah, a bit of boring stuff. And then we just get into outputting it. And what's really nice about this principle is, although this maybe looks very codey to a lot of people, actually, when you consider how you might build this, validate the data, all that kind of stuff inside the display code, which you should be doing, error checking, never trust user data or any data, frankly, before you output it. I've already done that. I've done it when I built it. I did it back in archive. So this is where I was validating data and building it and using utility functions to clean all the data. This just becomes a vessel, the template part. Okay. So yeah, it's an interesting concept when it comes to the don't repeat yourself principle of coding. It's called dry or don't repeat yourself, which is really important when you start building really complicated bespoke themes or even just simple ones. It just means that you amend once and it could update 12 different places across your site. So yeah, these could be used in archive cards, custom page templates, nice little featured post chunks, all kinds of stuff. And I'm just going to finish off by showing you a slightly more interesting. You know what? I'm going to stop there. Actually, I've probably taken up enough time, but hopefully that's explained the principle of reusable template parts and adapting them. So a couple of extension ideas of this is you could, depending on what data is fed through to it, it could display it in a different way, or you could have conditional display options in there, or it could simply just change its background if a certain parameter is set. So you could actually make one template part that could display in a lot of different ways as well, just by what data is passed through it, with a new little additional parameter in get template part, the third one, which is essentially variables, and that is the secret sauce. Incidentally, there was old ways of being able to do this. I think off the top of my head, don't quote me on this, but I used to use, I think it was set query var or something. It was something that sounded a little bit odd, but that's how I used to do exactly this technique. So new stuff in WordPress, really, really useful. Be efficient with your files and save your sanity by not repeating yourself. Thank you.